When my son Christopher died, my daughter-in-law Megan said, "Don't be dramatic, Sylvia. Pack your bags and learn to survive." I wiped my tears, loaded my old suitcase into the car, and lived in it for 3 weeks. That's when Christopher's lawyer called with news that changed everything. I'm so glad you're here to hear my story. Stay with me until the end. And please, drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I'd love to know how far this story travels. It was just 10 days after Christopher's funeral. I was sitting in the living room of the house we'd shared in Portland, Oregon, holding a framed photo from happier times. Christopher, my only son, grinning wide at a park, his arm around Mason, my grandson, who was clutching a baseball bat, all of 7 years old back then. The photo was worn at the edges from how often I'd held it lately. Christopher was gone, taken in a motorcycle accident that still felt like a bad dream. The pain was a heavy stone in my chest, one I carried every moment since the hospital called. I was 64, a retired social worker, and for the past 7 years, this house had been my home. I'd sold my little apartment across town when Christopher and Megan asked me to move in. Mason was just a toddler then, and Megan's advertising career kept her on the road. Christopher worked long hours as a contractor, so I stepped in, cooked dinners, driving Mason to preschool, reading him bedtime stories. It was my joy, my purpose. I thought it was our family's strengths. But that day, as I sat there, tracing Christopher's smile in the photo, Megan walked in and shattered that illusion. "Sylvia, we need to talk," she said, her voice sharp, like a knife cutting through the quiet. She wasn't the soft-spoken Megan who'd hugged me at the funeral, tears in her eyes for everyone to see. No, this was the real Megan, 37, polished, wearing a tailored blazer and heels that clicked on the hardwood floor. Her manicured nails tapped the kitchen counter, impatient, like she had somewhere better to be. "Of course, dear," I said, setting the photo down, expecting a conversation about Mason, maybe how we'd help him through his grief. He was only 12, and losing his dad had left him so quiet, so small. I thought Megan might want to plan something for him, a way to keep Christopher's memory alive, but she didn't sit down. She stood in the doorway, arms crossed, looking down at me where I sat on Christopher's old leather recliner, the one he'd insisted on keeping, even when Megan called it outdated. "I've been thinking about the house," she started, and something cold twisted in my stomach. With Christopher gone, things need to change. Mason and I need space to move forward. "Honestly, Sylvia, having you here, it's too much right now." I blinked, trying to make sense of her words. "Too much." My voice was barely a whisper. I glanced at the coffee table, where I'd been sorting Mason's drawings from years ago, ones he'd made for his dad. "Megan, I've been here for Mason. I pick him up from school, help with his homework, cook his favorite spaghetti. This is my home, too. Christopher wanted me here." Her laugh was short, sharp, like glass breaking. "Christopher said a lot of things, Sylvia, but he's not here anymore. This house is mine now. I need you to pack your things." Her words hit like a slap, stealing the air from my lungs. I gripped the armrest, the room tilting around me. "Pack my things." I thought of the little savings I had, barely enough for a month's rent in Portland's pricey suburbs, where Mason's school was, where Christopher was buried, where my whole life was. "What about Mason?" I managed to say, my voice shaking. "He needs me. I'm there when he comes home, when he talks about his dad. I'm his grandma." Megan's expression didn't soften. If anything, it grew colder. "Mason needs stability, not a grandmother who's always crying, always clinging to Christopher's things like he's coming back. It's not healthy, Sylvia. Don't be dramatic. You're a grown woman. Learn to survive." I stared at her, her blonde hair perfectly styled, her eyes fixed on her phone as if I were already gone. "Christopher always said you were stronger than you let on," she added, almost as an afterthought. "You'll figure it out." "Figure it out, with what?" "My social security check wouldn't cover rent here." I thought of Mason, his shy smile, when I'd read him adventure books, the way he'd hug me after a bad day. "I take care of him every day," I said, my voice breaking. "What about his routine, his dinner?" "I'll handle it," Megan said, waving a hand. "Maybe it's time he learned to be more independent anyway. Christopher spoiled him, and frankly, so do you." The cruelty in her tone cut deep. This was her son, the boy who still checked under his bed for monsters, who asked me to save his dad's old baseball cap because it smelled like him. Megan's parents had never been involved, too busy with their own lives in California. I was Mason's only grandparent, his constant, and now, She was dismissing me like I was nothing. How long do I have? I asked, barely audible. I'd like you gone by tomorrow night, she said, checking her watch. I've got contractors coming to redo Christopher's office. I don't want any awkwardness. Tomorrow night, 48 hours to pack. Up 7 years of my life, 7 years of tucking Mason in, of cooking Christopher's favorite chili, of being the glue that held this family together. Where am I supposed to go, Megan? I said, my voice trembling. I don't have a place lined up. Can I have a week, maybe 2? Her eyes narrowed, impatient. Sylvia, stop making this harder than it needs to be. Christopher's gone. The situation's changed. You're not my responsibility. Not her responsibility. After 7 years of dropping everything for her family, of staying up late with Mason when he had a fever, of keeping the house running while she jetted off to conferences, I nodded, my throat too tight to speak, and she turned away, already scrolling through her phone. That night, I packed my life into 2 suitcases. It was shocking how little I owned. The furniture in my room belonged to the house. Over the years, I'd given away most of my things, keeping only what mattered: a few clothes, a box of photos, and Christopher's old baseball medal, the one he'd won in high school and given to me, engraved with, "Mom, you're my hero." I tucked it into my bag, along with a picture of Christopher teaching Mason to ride a bike, both of them laughing under a summer sky. The hardest part was writing the note for Mason. How do you tell a 12-year-old you're leaving without making his mother the villain? How do you say goodbye when you don't know if you'll see him again? I kept it simple. Dear Mason, Grandma Sylvia has to move to a new place, but I love you more than anything. Be strong, like your dad. Love always. I left it on his desk, next to his baseball glove, where he'd see it after I was gone. I couldn't face his questions, his tears. Megan was right about one thing: he'd already lost his dad. He didn't need to see his grandma break to dot at dawn. I loaded my car, the trunk barely closing over my suitcases. I sat in the driveway, staring at the house Christopher had worked so hard to buy. The place where Mason still slept, unaware his grandma was disappearing from his life. Megan appeared at the window, sipping coffee, watching me. Making sure I left, I realized. Making sure I didn't change my mind and ruin her fresh start. I put the car in gear and drove away, my heart heavy with grief, with no idea where I'd go or how I'd survive what came next. I'm curious about you, listening to my story. Have you ever felt like your world was pulled out from under you? What would you do in my place? Let me know in the comments. Stay with me, there's more to this story, and it's not what you expect. 3 weeks. That's how long you can live in your car before the shame starts to feel like a second skin. I parked my old Honda behind a 24-hour coffee shop on the edge of Portland, far enough from Christopher's neighborhood that I wouldn't run into anyone who knew me, but close enough to drive by Mason's school and catch a glimpse of him during recess. Pathetic, maybe. But those fleeting moments, seeing his messy brown hair as he ran across the field, were the only light in my days. I was 64 years old, a retired social worker who'd spent decades helping others find their way. Now, I was the one lost. I'd wake up at dawn, my back aching from sleeping in the driver's seat, and slip into the coffee shop's bathroom to wash my face and brush my teeth. I'd order the cheapest thing on the menu, a plain bagel and a small coffee, and make it last as long as I could, sitting in a corner booth, reading a newspaper someone left behind. I stretched that coffee for hours, trying to look like I belonged, like I wasn't someone whose life had unraveled. The physical discomfort was hard, my knees ached, my neck stiffened, but it wasn't the worst part. The worst was the fear that came every night. Strange noises outside the car, headlights sweeping across the parking lot, the constant worry that a security guard would tap on my window and tell me to move along, or worse, that someone would call the police. But even that wasn't the hardest thing. The hardest thing was becoming invisible. I'd always been Sylvia Christopher's mom, Mason's grandma, the woman who organized potlucks for the neighborhood, who knew every teacher at Mason's school by name. Now, I was nobody. Last week, I saw my old friend Carol at the grocery store, buying apples just a few feet away. We'd shared tea and gossip for years, swapped recipes, laughed about our grandkids. But there, in the fluorescent light, she looked right through me. I don't blame her. My clothes were wrinkled from sleeping in them, my hair limp and unstippled, my face gaunt from weeks of eating nothing but bread and jam. I looked homeless because I tried to find a way out. I applied to senior housing, but the waiting lists were months long, and the deposits were more than my savings could cover. The few apartments I could afford were in parts of town where I didn't feel safe walking to my car, let alone living alone. Every day, I'd tell myself this was temporary. I'd figure it out, just like Megan said. But the truth was, I didn't know how. My savings were dwindling, my social security check barely covered gas and food, and the thought of being so far from Mason, from the only family I had left, broke my heart. One afternoon, I made the mistake of driving by Christopher's house until Megan decided it wasn't. I just wanted to see if Mason was outside, maybe playing catch in the front yard like he used to. Instead, I saw something that made my stomach churn. A dumpster sat in the driveway, overflowing with pieces of my son's life. There was his old desk, where he'd helped Mason with math homework every night. His bookshelf, still holding the adventure novels we used to read together. And there, tossed on top like trash, was the baseball glove Christopher had bought for Mason's first game. I could still see them practicing in the backyard. Christopher cheering louder than anyone when Mason caught his first fly ball. Megan stood by the dumpster, directing two men in work boots as they carried out more of Christopher's things. She was in yoga pants and a sleek jacket, her phone pressed to her ear, laughing like she didn't have a care in the world. I watched as they hauled out the small table where Christopher used to sketch house plans, the one he'd sit at for hours, dreaming up projects he'd never finish. They tossed it into the dumpster with a crash that echoed in my chest. I drove away before Megan could see me, my hands shaking so badly I had to pull over in a parking lot and sit until the trembling stopped. How could she erase him like that? How could she throw away the things that connected Mason to his dad? That night, I made another mistake. I checked Instagram on the library's computer during my daily hour of free Wi-Fi. Megan had posted a photo of the living room, now unrecognizable, all white walls and chrome furniture. Nothing like the warm, cluttered space where Christopher built pillow forts with Mason. The caption read, "New chapter, new vibes, grateful for fresh starts." The comments poured in, friends praising her strength, her style, her ability to move on. One even said, "Christopher would be so proud of you." I closed the browser, my eyes stinging. Proud. Christopher would have been heartbroken. That night, in my car behind the coffee shop, I let myself clearly cry for the first time since I'd left. Not the quiet tears I'd been holding back, but deep, raw sobs that came from a place I'd buried long ago. I cried for Christopher, for the son I'd never hold again. I cried for Mason, who might never know how much his dad loved him. I cried for the woman I used to be, someone with a purpose, a home, a family. But mostly, I cried because Megan's words kept echoing in my head. "You're not my responsibility." I was starting to believe I was disposable, that 7 years of love, of late-night talks with Mason, of keeping their world together, meant nothing. I fell asleep slumped against the car window, the cold glass pressing into my cheek. In my dreams, Christopher was alive again, young and full of life, tossing a baseball to Mason in the backyard. "Mom," he said, his voice clear as day, "you're my hero. Don't forget that." I woke up with a start, the dream fading, but his words lingered. I reached into my bag and pulled out the baseball medal he'd given me years ago, the one engraved with "Mom, you're my hero." I held it tight, like it could anchor me to something real. That the next morning, I was back at the coffee shop, nursing my usual bagel, when my phone rang, a number I didn't recognize. For a moment, I hesitated. Lately, unknown numbers meant bills I couldn't pay or problems I couldn't solve. But something, maybe Christopher's voice in my dream, made me answer. It was a call that would change everything. "I'm curious about you. Listening to my story. Have you ever felt like you were invisible, like the world stopped seeing you? What kept you going in those dark moments?" Share in the comments, I'd love to hear, and stick around. The story isn't over yet. There's a twist coming you won't see coming. The phone call came on a gray Portland morning, the kind where the rain doesn't fall so much as it hangs in the air, clinging to everything. I was sitting in my usual booth at the 24-hour coffee shop, my hands wrapped around a lukewarm cup of coffee, the baseball medal Christopher gave me tucked in my pocket like a talisman. 3 weeks of living in my car had left me hollow. But that morning, something felt different. Maybe it was the dream I'd had of Christopher, his voice calling me his hero. Maybe it was the stubborn part of me that refused to give up, even when I felt like I had nothing left. When my phone rang, the number was unfamiliar, and my first instinct was to let it go to voicemail. These days, unknown calls usually meant trouble bills I couldn't pay, reminders of a life I no longer had. But something made me slide my finger across the cracked screen. "Hello, this is Sylvia Gordon," I said, my voice hoarse from disuse. "Mrs. Gordon, this is Laura Bennett, from Bennett and Associates. I was your son, Christopher's attorney." My heart stuttered. An attorney. I braced myself for bad news, medical bills, maybe, or some legal tangle I couldn't afford to fix. "I've been trying to reach you for days," she continued, her tone professional, but kind. "We need to discuss urgent matters regarding Christopher's estate. Can you come to my office today? It's important." Estate. Christopher had always been careful with money, but I assumed whatever he had went to Megan and Mason. "I'm not sure I understand," I said, glancing down at my wrinkled sweater, my unwashed hair tucked under a scarf. "Megan handles all of Christopher's affairs now." There was a pause, the kind that carries weight. "Mrs. Gordon, there are specific provisions in your son's will that concern you directly, provisions Megan is not aware of. I need to speak with you in person. Can you be here at 11 a.m.? We're in downtown Portland, the Cascade Building on 3rd Street. I hesitated, my mind racing. "Ms. Bennett, I should tell you, I'm going through a rough patch. I might not look presentable." Her voice softened, but there was a firmness to it. "Mrs. Gordon, please come as you are. This cannot wait." Something in her tone, a mix of urgency and compassion, made my pulse quicken. I agreed, though I had no idea what I was walking into. 3 hours later, I sat in an office that felt like another world. Polished wood floors, floor-to-windows, a view of the Willamette River glinting under a rare break in the clouds. I felt out of place in my faded coat, my hands clutching a paper cup of coffee Laura's assistant had offered me. It was the best coffee I'd had in weeks, rich and warm, but I barely tasted it. Laura Bennett was a woman in her late 50s, with sharp eyes and a gentle smile that put me at ease. She leaned forward, her hands folded on a thick manila folder. "Mrs. Gordon, before we begin, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. What's your current living situation?" The question caught me off guard, and heat rose to my cheeks. I looked down at my chipped nails, the stains on my sleeve. "I'm between homes right now," I said, the words bitter on my tongue. Laura's expression grew concerned. "Are you staying with friends? Family?" The kindness in her voice nearly undid me. I swallowed hard, staring at the coffee cup. "I'm staying in my car." The truth hung in the air, heavy and raw. I braced for judgment, but Laura just nodded, making a note on her legal pad, her face showing only compassion. "Christopher suspected this might happen," she said quietly. "He was a very perceptive man." She opened the folder, pulling out a document. "Mrs. Gordon, I need to read you a section of your son's will. But first, what do you know about Christopher's financial situation?" I shook my head. "Not much. He had life insurance, I think, and the house. I assumed it all went to Megan and Mason." Laura adjusted her glasses. "Christopher came to see me 6 months ago, after a close call on his motorcycle. He wanted to update his will, and he was very specific about certain changes he asked me to keep confidential. Until after his passing." She began to read, her voice steady. "To my beloved mother, Sylvia Gordon, who gave up so much for my happiness and well-being, I leave the sum of $6 million, to be held in trust and managed by Bennett and Associates, until Mrs. Gordon establishes stable housing and financial security." The words didn't register at first. $6 million. I stared at her, certain I'd misheard. "I'm sorry. Could you say that again?" Laura smiled faintly. $6 million, Mrs. Gordon. Your son was wealthier than most people knew. He'd made smart investments in real estate over the years, and his life insurance policy was substantial. My head spun. "But Megan said," she said everything was hers now. Laura's expression darkened. "What exactly did Megan tell you?" The words poured out of Mitha. Eviction, Megan's cold dismissal, the way she'd called me a burden, told me to survive on my own. As I spoke, Laura's face grew grimmer, her pen moving quickly across her notepad. When I finished, she leaned back. "Christopher anticipated this. There's more to the will you need to hear." She flipped to another page. "In the event that my wife, Megan Walsh, attempts to remove my mother from our family home, or cut off contact between my mother and my son, Mason Walsh, full temporary custody of Mason, shall transfer to my mother." Sylvia Gordon, with all necessary financial support provided. My coffee cup slipped from my hands, and Laura caught it before it hit the floor. Custard, my heart pounded. How is that possible? I whispered. Laura pulled out another folder, this one thicker. Christopher documented several concerns about Megan's behavior in his final months. Her focus on his financial assets, her comments about starting over after his death, her lack of emotional support for Mason's grief. He also left something else. She opened her laptop and turned it toward me. He recorded audio diaries, with my guidance, to protect you and Mason. She pressed play, and Christopher's voice filled the room, warm and familiar, like he was sitting right there. My chest tightened, tears welling up. Laura, I need to talk about Megan, he said, his tone heavy. I've overheard her on the phone with her boss, talking about what she'd do with my insurance money, investing it in her company, moving to a bigger house. She said Mom's in the way, that she'd send her packing once I'm gone. I can't let that happen. Mason needs Mom. She's the one who loves him like I do. The recording went on, detailing Megan's plans to sell the house, to simplify her life without Christopher's baggage. When it stopped, I was trembling, tears streaming down my face. Laura handed me a tissue. There's also a letter Christopher wrote to you, she said. Would you like me to read it, or would you prefer to read it privately? My hands were shaking too badly to hold anything. Please, read it, I said, my voice barely audible. She unfolded a sheet of paper, Christopher's handwriting sprawling across it, and began. Mom, if you're hearing this, it means Megan's done what I feared. I'm so sorry I couldn't warn you while I was alive. I was afraid she'd turn Mason against you if she knew what I suspected. I've seen how she talks about you when she thinks I'm not listening, how she resents your place in our family. She's wrong, Mom. You're not a burden. You're the heart of this family. You gave up your home, your comfort, to take care of us. The money I'm leaving you isn't just an inheritance, it's my way of saying thank you. It's also my way of making sure you have the power to protect Mason. He needs you, Mom, the way I always did. Don't let Megan's words make you doubt yourself. You're his hero, too. I love you always, your son, Christopher. By the time Laura finished, I was sobbing not just from grief, but from something new. Relief, vindication, a spark of strength I hadn't felt in weeks. Christopher had seen Megan's true colors. He'd planned for this, protected me, protected Mason. For the first time, I didn't feel invisible. I felt seen, by the son I'd lost, but who was still fighting for me. When can we start the custody process? I asked, my voice steadier than it had been in months. Laura smiled. We can file the paperwork today, but first, let's get you out of that car. Christopher set aside funds for your immediate needs, housing essentials. We'll arrange a hotel for tonight and start looking for something permanent. As we discussed next steps, I felt something shift inside me. For 3 weeks, I'd been a victim of Megan's cruelty, of my own despair. But sitting in that office, hearing Christopher's voice, reading his words, I realized I wasn't a victim anymore. I was about to become the most important person in Mason's life, with the resources and the love to give him what he needed. Christopher hadn't just left me money, he'd given me purpose. Have you ever had someone believe in you when you'd stopped believing in yourself? What was that moment like? Share it in the comments, I'd love to know. And stay with me, the story's about to take another turn. 3 days after that life-changing meeting with Laura Bennett, I stood in front of the house that had been my home for 7 years. The Portland rain had let up, leaving the air damp and heavy, but I felt different, stronger, like a weight had lifted. I wasn't the same Sylvia who'd driven away in shame, my life stuffed into suitcases. This time, I held legal documents that changed everything. Laura had insisted on coming with me, along with a social worker named Karen and a police officer, Officer Daniels, a calm woman with kind eyes. Standard procedure for custody transfers, Laura explained. But it felt like more than that. It felt like justice. I'd spent the last 2 nights in a hotel suite, the kind of place I'd never have dreamed of staying in before. Hot showers, clean sheets, meals that didn't come from a gas station. Laura's office had arranged it all, using the funds Christopher had set aside for my immediate needs. I was wearing new clothes, nothing fancy, just a simple sweater and slacks, but they fit, and my hair was neat for the first time in weeks. The biggest change, though, wasn't what you could see. It was the quiet confidence I carried, knowing I wasn't powerless anymore. Remember, Laura said as we walked up the front path, let me do most of the talking at first. Megan may react emotionally. Officer Daniels nodded, glancing at the house. I see movement inside someone's home. I pressed the doorbell, the familiar chime echoing in my chest. How many times had I heard that sound, coming home with groceries, with Mason's school projects? Now, I was a visitor, but one with authority. Through the frosted glass, I saw Megan's figure approaching. She probably thought it was a delivery, or maybe one of her friends stopping by to admire her newly redecorated house. The door swung open, and her face shifted confusion, then recognition, then a flash of annoyance. When she saw Laura, Karen, and Officer Daniels behind me, her expression turned to something close to panic. "Sylvia, what is this?" she said, her voice tight. "What are you doing here?" Laura stepped forward, her tone calm but firm. "Mrs. Walsh, I'm Laura Bennett, Christopher's attorney. We need to discuss important legal matters concerning your son, Mason. May we come in?" Megan's eyes darted between us. "I don't understand, Sylvia. Are you in trouble? Why are the police here?" The irony wasn't lost on me. Even now, standing there with a lawyer and official documents, Megan assumed I was the problem. Officer Daniels spoke gently. "Mrs. Walsh, we're here to execute a legal custody transfer. May we step inside to discuss this privately?" Megan's face paled, but she stepped back, letting us in. The living room looked like her Instagram photos, sterile, all white and chrome, not a trace of the warm, lived-in space where Christopher used to play catch with Mason on the rug. Gone were the family photos, the cozy couch where Mason did his homework. It was like Christopher had never existed. "Where's Mason?" Karen, the social worker, asked, checking her clipboard. "He's at school," Megan said automatically, then froze, realizing the weight of the question. "Wait, what do you mean by custody transfer?" Laura opened her briefcase, pulling out the documents we'd reviewed. "Mrs. Walsh, I need to inform you of certain provisions in your late husband's will that are now taking effect." As Laura read the section about the custody transfer, I watched Megan's polished mask crack. Her hands gripped the edge of her new white sofa, her knuckles white. "This is impossible," she interrupted, her voice rising. "Christopher never mentioned this. You're lying." Laura's expression didn't waver. "I have the original documents here, Mrs. Walsh, along with audio recordings of conversations between you and Christopher that addressed these concerns." She pulled out a small recorder and pressed play. Christopher's voice filled the room, steady but heavy with worry. "Megan, what are your plans for Mom if something happens to me?" Megan's recorded voice was cool, detached. "Sylvia's sweet, Chris, but she's not my responsibility. Mason and I need a fresh start. She'll figure something out." The conversation went on, Megan talking about selling the house, investing the insurance money in her ad agency, moving to a better neighborhood. When it stopped, the silence was deafening. "How dare you?" Megan whispered, her eyes blazing as she turned to me. "How dare you come into my home with these people and try to take my son?" I met her gaze, my voice quiet but steady. "He's not just your son, Megan. He's Christopher's son, too, and according to his will, he's now my responsibility." "You can't do this," she shouted, her composure unraveling. "I'll fight it. You're homeless, Sylvia. You have no job, no money." Laura cleared her throat. "Mrs. Walsh, I should inform you that Mrs. Gordon is the beneficiary of a $6 million inheritance from Christopher's estate. Her financial and housing situation is resolved." The number hit Megan like a physical blow. She stumbled back, catching herself against the sofa. $6 million. Her voice was barely audible. "The life insurance was only $1 million. I already got that." Laura nodded. "Christopher had significant investments beyond the insurance. He chose to leave to his mother, along with custody of Mason." Megan's eyes darted around the room, as if looking for an escape. I could see her mind racing, realizing she'd lost not just Mason but the wealth she'd likely been counting on. "This isn't fair," she said, her voice breaking. "I'm his mother. I couldn't hold back anymore." "Are you?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. "When was the last time you sat with Mason when he cried about his dad? When did you ask him how he's feeling instead of telling him to move on because his grief doesn't fit your schedule?" Megan's mouth opened, then closed, no words coming out. Karen looked up from her notes. "Mrs. Walsh, we'll need to pick Mason up from school at 3 p.m. Mrs. Gordon has temporary housing arranged, and permanent housing will be secured within the week." Megan's hands shook. "His things, his clothes are upstairs. Some of his toys are in storage." Officer Daniels glanced at her phone. According to reports, several boxes of Mason's belongings were removed from the house last week. My anger flared. You got rid of his things? His dad's things? Megan's voice was desperate now. I was trying to help him move on. All those old things just reminded him of what he lost. Those old things were his connection to his father, I said, my voice steady but firm. They're the memories he'll need when he's older, when he wants to remember how much Christopher loved him. As we left to prepare for the school pickup, Megan grabbed my arm. Sylvia, please, you don't understand what you're doing. Mason needs stability. I looked at her hand, remembering all the times I'd offered her support, only to be pushed away. Megan, I said gently, removing her hand, you had your chance to provide stability. Instead, you gave him a redecorated house and a mother too busy to listen. Mason will see you. Of course, Christopher wanted that, but it'll be on my terms. Her shoulders slumped, her voice weak. This isn't over. But there was no fight left in her words. We drove to Mason's school, my heart a mix of sadness and anticipation. Sadness for the family Christopher had tried to hold together. Anticipation for the chance to give Mason what he needed: love, warmth, a real home. When we arrived, I waited outside Mason's classroom, my heart pounding. The bell rang, and kids spilled out, laughing, running. Then I saw him, my Mason, his backpack slung over one shoulder, his eyes downcast. When he spotted me, his face lit up, then faltered, like he wasn't sure he could trust what he saw. He walked over slowly, stopping a few feet away. Grandma Sylvia, his voice was small, uncertain. Are you real, or am I dreaming again? I knelt down, ignoring the curious stares from parents and teachers. I'm real, sweetheart, I said, my voice catching. I'm here to take you home. His eyes widened. Mom said you left because you didn't want to stay with us anymore. The words broke my heart. I glanced at Karen, who nodded, giving me permission to speak freely. Your mom was wrong, Mason. I never wanted to leave you. I love you more than anything in the world. He hesitated, then ran into my arms, his skinny frame trembling. I thought you were mad at me, he whispered. I thought that's why you didn't say goodbye. I held him tight, tears streaming down my face. Oh, Mason, I could never be mad at you. I left because your mom asked me to, but I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere. Karen stepped forward, her voice gentle. Mason, your grandma is going to take care of you from now on. She has a nice place for you to stay, and everything's been arranged. Mason looked up at me, his eyes searching. You mean I get to live with you? I nodded, smiling through my tears. Always, sweetheart. We're going to have our own home, with room for all your things and all your memories of your dad. As we walked to the car, Mason clutched my hand, something he hadn't done since he was little. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. What would you say to a child who thinks they've been abandoned? How would you help them heal? Share your thoughts in the comments side. Love to hear. And stay with me. We're not done yet. There's a new beginning coming for Mason and me. The first night in our new home, a modest 3-bedroom house in a quiet Portland suburb, felt like a dream I was afraid to wake up from. It wasn't fancy, not like the showcase Megan had turned Christopher's house into, but it was ours. The living room had a worn-in couch, perfect for sprawling out with Mason's comic books. The kitchen table was just big enough for us to share meals and stories, and the backyard had a patch of grass where Mason could practice his pitching. The sound of his baseball thumping against the fence, a reminder that life was starting again. I was 64, a retired social worker, and for the first time in weeks, I woke up knowing exactly why I was here. Mason needed me not as a babysitter or a housekeeper, but as the person who'd love him through his grief, who'd keep his dad's memory alive. That first week, we settled into the house Laura's office had helped us find. Was temporary, but it felt like a home. I hung a photo of Christopher in the living room, his grin lighting up the space, and put Mason's baseball glove on a shelf where he could see it every day. Mason was different here. At Megan's, he'd been quiet, careful, like he was afraid to take up space. Now, he left his sneakers by the door, his homework scattered across the table. One evening, I caught him laughing, really laughing, at a silly joke I told about Christopher's terrible cooking. It was the first time I'd heard that sound since before the accident. It felt like a small miracle. We started new routines. Every night, we'd eat dinner together, nothing fancy, just spaghetti or grilled cheese. But we'd talk, really talk, about school, about his friends, about how much he missed his dad. One night, Mason looked up from his plate and asked, "Grandma Sylvia, do you think Dad's watching us?" I set my fork down, my throat tight. "I do, sweetheart. I think he's watching, and I think he's smiling, knowing you're here with me."